Simpler is one of Ableton Live's most powerful virtual instruments. With its default settings, Simpler presents itself as a mere sample playback machine. However, thanks to its warping functionality, you'll see that it's capable of performing powerful granular audio processing, among many other things. If you're watching this video and you are not familiar with what granular synthesis is, we highly recommend reading this article before you continue. Unfortunately, we're not going to explain the science behind granular synthesis in this video, because it would easily make the video twice as long. Alright, we're going to start off with this audio clip. It consists of 8 different impact sounds. They sound like this. Great, now let's drag this audio into a Simpler. In its initial state, Simpler works like your typical sampler. Incoming MIDI notes above the root note will pitch the sample up, and notes below will pitch the sample down. Brilliant! Now, what we're going to do is put the Simpler in slice mode. In this mode, Simpler slices the sample into separate regions, or slices. Instead of transposing the sample's pitch, different MIDI notes will trigger different slices. The first slice is triggered by the MIDI note C1, and subsequent slices are mapped above this note in a chromatic manner. Where Simpler places these slices is based on the slicing algorithm. With the transient algorithm, the slices are placed on the audio's transients, or sudden peaks in amplitude. Next, we're going to set the trigger mode to gate. In gate mode, sample playback stops when its corresponding note is released. Now, let's turn down the transient detector sensitivity, so that each impact sound will be mapped to a different MIDI note. Next, let's set the warp mode to texture and turn the flux parameter all the way down. Don't worry, we'll explain what flux does in a minute. Now, we're going to click this button to double the length of the sample, effectively slowing it down by 100%. Can you hear that? Let's double the length again. Again. That's granular synthesis. Nice. The grain size parameter adjusts the length of each grain, with smaller values resulting in shorter grains and larger values in, well, longer grains. The flux parameter adds an element of randomness to the length of the grains. Higher values result in more randomness, adding a sort of stuttery characteristic to the sound. Using the grain size and flux parameters in conjunction with each other will lead to lots of neat results. Transposing the audio will lead to even more neat results. You can even try modulating the pitch with Simpler's built-in LFO. Modulating with Simpler's pitch envelope is also an option. We're only scratching the surface here. Feel free to experiment to your heart's content on your own. Now let's see what the other warping modes have in store for us, starting with Tones mode. Tones mode is basically texture mode without the flux parameter. However, the grain size in Tones mode is signal dependent, whereas in texture mode the grain size is static. Long story short, Tones mode still behaves differently than texture mode. Hear it for yourself. Beats mode is quite interesting. It can process the sample based on its transient content, or it can process it against defined beat divisions. When the preserve parameter is set to transients, Simpler will play and loop a transient until it reaches the next one, with which it will repeat the same process. This cycle repeats until the entire audio sample has finished playback. With the preserve parameter set to any of the beat divisions, Simpler will loop the same snippet of audio until the next beat occurs. This is what it sounds like when the beat division is a quad note. Now let's try an eighth note. And now 16th and 32nd notes. Again, remember that these beat divisions are BPM dependent. Now, let's talk about Beats mode's loop parameter. This parameter determines Beats mode's looping behavior from transient to transient, or beat to beat. The default setting is loop back and forth. In this mode, each segment of audio between transients plays to its end. Playback then reverses until it reaches a zero crossing near the middle of the segment, and then proceeds again towards the end of the segment. This pattern continues until the time when the next transient occurs. In loop forward mode, the audio segments between transients only loop forwards, which sounds like this. Here's loop back and forth mode again for comparison. In loop-off mode, each segment of audio between transients plays to its end and then stops. Any remaining time between the end of a segment and the next transient will be silent. Let's not forget about the envelope slider. This slider applies a volume fade to each segment of audio between transients. Setting a value of 100 effectively means that there is no fade, while a value of 0 implies an almost instantaneous decay. Using the slider in conjunction with different beat divisions can lead to some nice rhythmic and glitchy things. Transposing the sample adds another level of exploration. Let's move on to the complex and complex Proa modes. These warping modes behave quite differently than the rest. Let us demonstrate. First, we'll revert the audio sample back to its original length. Now, listen. Quite a unique sound, isn't it? Sounds a bit like Simpler's pitch envelope is very effective in these modes. Complex Pro mode is very similar to complex mode, except it provides additional control via two sliders. The formant slider adjusts how much the sample's formants will be compensated when being transposed, while the envelope slider influences the spectral characteristics of the sample. In conventional situations, these sliders are used to preserve a sample's intelligibility when being transposed. But let's be honest, that's not what we're doing here. Lastly, repitch mode raises or lowers the sample's pitch to create the designated amount of time stretching. This is how traditional samplers worked back in the day. Excellent. Now that we've demonstrated Simpler's capabilities, we'd like to show you one of the ways we enjoy using this powerful instrument. Here we have a song with some interesting harmonic content.
When I wake up, the dream comes true. When I wake up, the dream comes true.
Let's drag it into Simpler. Brilliant. We're going to set Simpler to slice mode yet again, but now we're going to use the region setting to slice the sample. This slices the sample into separate regions of equal length.
When I wake up.
The regions parameter determines the number of regions created. We're going to set this parameter to 64, which is the maximum number of regions you can create.
When I wake.
Let's set the warp mode to texture and look for a nice slice of audio. That's nice. Now we're going to stretch this thing out. That sounds pretty great, but we think it might sound even better with a large, spacious reverb. Wow, listen to that. You know what? Let's just go wild on this thing. Incredible. Well, that was quite fun, but now you must remember. Sonically, you've only seen the tip of the iceberg. These techniques will yield a staggering range of results depending on what kind of sounds you load into Simpler, so experiment away. If you happen to create something particularly compelling, or use some of these techniques in one of your future projects, please do send us a link to it. We always love to hear your work. Congratulations! You have reached the end of this video. We sincerely hope you learned something worthwhile. Until next time, goodbye.